Hello and welcome. Today I'm talking with Dr. Timothy Yen, CEO of Pivot Counselling, and among one of his many specialties, he uses the Enneagram as part of his counselling practice, which I am excited to learn more about. Welcome, Timothy. So tell me a little bit about your counselling practice.
Yes, so the name of my counseling practice is called Pivot Counseling, and we are primarily based in the Bay Area, Northern California. We have about a 5-member team, and we do a kind of a combination of counseling and coaching, but primarily counseling. And we are really big on this motto, which is pivot together and create a life worth living. That's a really big part of our culture. And something that sets us apart, I would say, is we're very big on cultural context. So when we get to know people, we want to know their whole story and all the factors that contribute to their worldview, how they see the world, what they feel about different things. And so, yeah, we want to create relevant solutions. And the only way to do that is to know a person's whole story. So we put that into a high priority here.
I love that, knowing a person's whole story. And this phrase pivot together is fantastic. I love it. How did you come to that? It's the name of your business. Like, how did that emerge for you through your counseling career?
Well, pivot kind of it's an action word, right? It's a verb. So it has to do with changing or shifting. And a lot of times the reason why people come to counseling is because they're stuck or they're confused. They're not really sure how to go about obtaining and living their best life. And so I really emphasize pivot because it means that some type of change has to occur, but we don't want people to do it on their own, that it is a collaborative journey where we partner with people to make that happen.
You mentioned earlier that you want your practice to be focused more holistically on learning the whole story about someone. And how does the Enneagram play into that philosophy?
So for those who don't know, the Enneagram is one of my personal favorite personality tests. But with Enneagram, it really takes into account when you are under a lot of stress, when you're relaxed and you're in the flow. People show up differently in different kinds of situations. And so to me, the Enneagram is much more of a living, breathing personality assessment. And that works really well for me.
It's very
And
dynamic.
it is. And I love that about the Enneagram. And so to answer your question about how it's used in counseling, for me, a big piece of collaboration and figuring out goals for my clients is to figure out the things that they value. And I'm an author of a book called Choose Better, which is really big on decision making. And two of the 5 pillars of this framework for making authentic decisions have to do with values of self and values of others. And the Enneagram does a beautiful job of putting words to things that resonate with people. And it just helps them become a bit more crystal clear on why certain things matter to them.
And so when you've identified that thing about what matters to them, how do you use that as part of your approach to counseling?
Well, my hope is that whatever counseling goals that we set together, that it speaks to their values. Otherwise, like, what's the point? Like, what's the point of them doing all these things if it won't really matter to them or to the things that matter to them? So that's why the values conversation is so important, because unless we can align ourselves with these values in our goals, we might want to reevaluate those goals in the first place.
Can you give me some examples?
For example, if someone really, let's say a type 3. So I know my type the best, right? So
Yeah.
type 3 achiever, it's kind of self-explanatory. Type 3s really care about accomplishments, about really pushing themselves to the limit. They're really big on perform with excellence. And there's a certain level of vanity, I think, that comes with type 3s. Like, we want to look the part. We want people to think well of us. And as you can probably guess, there are some dark sides to that. If you kind of dive too deep into looking good, but at the expense of not being honest, then that's probably too high of a price. But all that being said, it would make sense for a type 3 to set goals that do have some element of achievement and things that really matter to them, maybe even in comparison to the greater society at large. There's something about being able to have a unique contribution that, uh, I don't know, soars above the clouds. There's something that is defining for that individual. And so we take a look at those goals and we kind of check in and see, like, is there some of those type 3 elements in those goals? Because it would just make it that much more meaningful for them.
Well, that sounds really interesting. Do you have like another example you could share about how that has played into the work for a client?
Sure. So I'm thinking about a type 6 client right now, and we worked together for, several months. And he came to me because he lacked confidence. He just wasn't quite sure of himself. I mean, he had a well-paying job. He was tall. I would say
I like how tall
objectively
was a figure. Yeah.
handsome.
Yeah.
Yeah, like he's a good guy. Like in terms of what society would characterized as someone who should have confidence. He kind of has the whole package, but for whatever reason, he just had a lot of kind of self doubt. He felt like he was socially awkward. And so I had him take the Enneagram just to be able to kind of pinpoint a little bit more about his values, about who he is. And turns out he was a type 6. And it turns out because he's a type 6, he is someone that tends to look toward authorities figures to kind of fact check whether his decisions are on point, and he won't look stupid if he makes the wrong choice. But funny enough, there's a saying that goes, strength overextended becomes a weakness. That's kind of what ended up happening with him, because now he lacked the confidence because every decision that he made, it was always someone else's idea. Like it was never really his choice. It's because my mother said that. It's because my professor said that. My boss said that. And so he never really felt or took ownership of life choices that he made really for himself. And so our counseling goals kind of shifted a bit, where it was okay as a type 6 to do your research, be read up, talk to other experts, get a second opinion. But when it came down to it, he had to learn to take ownership and assume all the risks that come with the decisions that he's going to make, and it had to be his. And that's when he stepped into being more confident.
And that's something sixes need to learn to do, is to own their own authority and own their own power. Um,
100%. That's right.
and I can imagine that once he was able to make that shift, it was transformative.
It was. It was something that I always saw in him, but he had trouble seeing in himself until he was willing to take some risks and say certain things, ask a girl out, like do certain kind of challenges. And he was then able to really feel and take ownership of those experiences.
It's one of the things I love and find fascinating about the Enneagram is that it sometimes seems like the smallest of things that we need to learn to do, like asking someone out or speaking up in a meeting. They sound so simple, and yet they can be so challenging and terrifying, and like all the things that come up. And so sometimes when we're seeking out counseling or coaching, it is for things that almost sound innocuous but are transformative when we're able to step into them.
100%. And it's funny because what makes counseling or coaching different is that oftentimes on the surface it seems very obvious. It's like, oh, like you're shy. Well, speak up, right? Put yourself out there.
Yeah.
It's
Just
going to
do
work
it.
out. Right?
Yeah.
Just do it. But then we find out that it's almost like their brain has to make that transformative switch where it makes sense to them. The risk is tolerable. And so counseling allows this process to develop customized language for the person's mind that helps break through those mental barriers.
And what you just mentioned it before, but what do you see is the difference between counseling and coaching?
So I like to use this analogy between counseling and coaching. There's a lot of overlap for sure. They're both talk-based treatments or services. But the analogy I like to use is counseling is taking someone from, let's say if there's a scale of -10 to +10, it's taking someone from the negatives to the neutral. So we're just trying to get them functioning again, like back to baseline, being able to enjoy things again, all those different things. Coaching is taking someone that's completely functional, high functioning even, but creating even more. So taking them from the neutral to the positives. So the coaching language is much more about, okay, you're doing great now, but what would you want to create? If you can go farther, what would that look like? If you can make more
Mm.
impact, more influence, how can we help you reach those goals or that vision?
If someone was looking for a counselor, what should they keep in mind?
So we've been talking a lot about values, and one of the most important things about looking for a counselor is finding someone that you believe shares similar values. And what I mean by that is every single counselor that you meet with, this is true about coaches as well, is that there is no such thing as a neutral coach or a neutral counselor. And the reason why is because we bring ourselves into the room. Like we are the tool, just like surgeons have scalpels, like we are the tool that we bring into the room. And so we're always going to be guiding someone toward our version of health, whatever health may look
Mm.
like. So if my version of health, if my client's idea of health is very different, then you may not want to work with that counselor because they're not leading you toward something that you truly value.
So, how do you figure out a, a counselor's or a coach's values?
Well, hopefully they have good copyright on their website because their website will probably give you a taste, kind of a feel for the things that the counselor cares about. Not to make other counselors or therapists' jobs harder, but sometimes I encourage clients to have a set of questions like that to ask their therapist on their first visit. Of course, that the therapist will have their own set of intake interview questions. So they'll be like, hey, tell me about your family, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's fair game for clients to ask questions back to their counselor. They can ask questions like, hey, tell me a little bit more about your definition of health. If you're going to guide me somewhere, what would that look like? What are the things that you value? And yes, it does put the therapist on the spot. It's probably going to make them freeze a little bit. But I think in that one encounter, you'll have a certain sense of this is my person. This is the person that will take me to where I want to go.
So, other than trying to make sure you're finding a counselor who aligns with your values and asking them questions as part of that process, is there anything else to think about when it comes to finding or choosing a counselor that's right for you?
So I definitely want to normalize that looking for a counselor can be kind of daunting. It's kind of scary,
Really?
and
It
just
is.
going out there saying that I need this support or I want this support, that's like half the battle. And so I really want to encourage people to say it's worth it. It's worth the pursuit and to solve maybe gridlock issues that you've been wrestling with for years. Why not speed up that process and get it done in 3 months, 6 months, a year versus 10 or 20 years of time. But that being said, I would say there's two things that I really look for. If I was going to look for a counselor, like these are kind of the two things that I would be looking for. The first one is your ability to feel comfortable with them and to trust them. And just in the first meeting, you'll get a sense like, yes, this is someone that is easy to talk to. I feel like this person's for me. It's hard to put to words. It's really a feeling where you can build that trust quickly. I would say that's factor number one. Factor number two is, does this person have the expertise, the competency to get me to where I want to go? So being nice and being a good listener, that's half the equation, but hopefully this is also someone that is has the ability to create the kind of change and pivot and shift the way that you want.
Thank you so much for sharing your insight and wisdom about counseling and the Enneagram. And how can people find you?
They can go on the World Wide Web. My website is www.timyen.com, TIMYEN.com, and you can learn more about me right there.
Well, thanks again. It's been great talking with you.
Of course.